Well, welcome everyone. I'm Laura Podolsky. I'm the Policy Director for the National Center for Sustainable Transportation. I just want to start off with a word of thanks. I want to thank everyone for taking the time today out of your schedules to come join us. We really appreciate it. I know there's tons of other things that you could be doing, but we really appreciate you taking the time, meeting with us, hearing about some of the research we're doing, and then engaging with the conversation about what this research means to you, your job, your responsibilities, as well as California and beyond. So again, just really appreciate that. And the second thanks I would like to give is as representatives of your agencies and departments. We want to thank you for your support. We wouldn't be able to do this research without your support. We wouldn't be able to do these type of engagement events and try to get this research out. And we wouldn't be able to train and educate this next round of leadership coming in. And I've heard that Caltrans, a lot of the employees are getting closer and closer to retirement. Do I see? Some heads are shaking, yes. And so that, having that conveyor belt of new talent coming in, is really important. So we just want to thank you again for your support for that. We do have friends that are participating via webcast, so hello. I don't know how this is working, but this is to all the friends that are participating via webcast. I believe there is an email that's being shared, but if you do have questions for those participating via webcast, you can email them to Natalie, and her email is natruiz@ucdavis.edu. So you can email those to her. And just some quick logistics before we get started. Bathrooms, the women's is through this door, through this hallway, and then the door on your right, and then the men's is back through towards that door. So if you need to use the restroom, they're there. So, on that word of thanks, I also want to continue that thought by sharing the reason for this briefing. So we are very thankful for the support of our state agencies and departments, and we wanted to provide a special venue, if you will, to share some of our research and to engage with you on what that means, again, with you all. And so this is another way of us trying to ensure that the research doesn't stay in the ivory tower, if you will, but actually makes its way out and benefits the staff from our funders, those funder agencies and departments. We're very committed to that, and so any feedback you have on other ways that we could be better serving the staff and providing information from our research, I'm the person to share that with. I was brought on and specifically to ensure that our research is making its way into the hands of practitioners and policymakers. So any feedback on that is very welcomed. So with that note, I do have some introductions to today's briefing, but first, if we can, this is like all the microphone, everything's so loud, and we're such a small group, it seems a little too much, but I do want to get a sense of who's in the room, and I think that would be really helpful. So if we can do a quick round of introductions, I think that would be really great, and if you could say your name, what agency you're with, and even just a sentence of what you do or what you're interested in would be really helpful. And we're a small group, so I think we can do this relatively quickly. So I'll just start with Natalie. Since she's one of us, I'll put her on the hot seat. So.
Hi everyone, I'm Natalie. I'm the event coordinator for the Institute of Transportation Studies and our energy cluster.
Don Garris with the National Center for Sustainable Transportation.
Tom Trinitane with Plug-in Hybrid Electric Vehicle Research Center.
This is Kadir, and I'm at the CEC Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Unit.
Alyssa Kendall, I'm at UC Davis in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering.
Lauren Yakabuchi, Caltrans Division of Research, Innovation, and System Information.
Jesse Gage, Energy Commission, work with the Transportation Energy Demand Forecast.
Mark Polnier, also the Energy Commission, and I would say City Forecast thinking is
Great.
And it's Bahrainian Energy Commission, Transportation Energy Forecasting.
Okay.
Melanie Zelshore, Research Division, Air Resources Board.
Adi Questani, Air Resources Board with the CDR people.
Okay.
Tim Harkin with the Resources Board and incentives for advanced transportation.
Oh, perfect.
Leslie Brody with the California Energy Commission, Fields of Transportation Division, and the Light Duty Vehicle Infrastructure.
Great. And Tyson Eckerly with the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, and I do zero emission vehicle infrastructure.
Okay, great.
Lindsay Town Oil and Energy Commission, work on EV
grants?
Matthew Long, Energy Commission, part of the BIOFUEL staff, and the agreement manager for our grant with the NCST.
Melissa Thompson from Caltrans Sustainability.
Okay, great.
Nikita Huckabee, also Caltrans, but from the Division of Research Innovation System Information.
Okay, great.
Ed Hartman with the Caltrans Division of Equipment Development Deployment.
Robert Srivastava, Conservation Planning at Catahouse.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And for all the webcast folks participating, I hope you heard all that. You might have not, but that's your incentive to be here next time in person so you can be a part of that conversation if you can. I know some are participating from outside of Sacramento. So I did provide just a couple introductions. So first I wanted to go over just what we wanted to accomplish, the goals for today. I covered most of this already, but it's just to provide an update to you all of the products of your investment. We want to tell you what we've been up to, what the research we've been doing. We're going to take a deeper dive into some of that research. We have some presentations for you today from Melissa Kendall and Tom Turrentine. And then the part I'm really looking forward to is a facilitated discussion with all of you on the research implications to, again, what you do as an individual within your state, agency, department, as well as just, we can talk bigger too. What are these implications to California, the nation, global? It's just, we can get as big as we want. And after hearing the introductions, you proved me correctly that this is a group of some of those, the transportation leaders here in California. So I really want to tap into all these varying perspectives to hear exactly what our research means to you from your vantage point. And then I think importantly too, we want to tease out what are some of those future research needs and things that we should be thinking about as we're planning future research projects that we're going to invest in. So I'll make sure that we get to that part of the day before we wrap up. So a quick introduction to the National Center. So the National Center, our mission is to advance environmentally sustainable transportation system through cutting-edge research, direct policy engagement, education of our future leaders. There it is in one sentence. We are, some of you may or may not know, we are one of 5 US DOT designated national centers. So there's 5 nationally, one on each of the US DOT strategic goals. The National Center for Sustainable Transportation is their center on environmental sustainability. And we are a consortium. So the National Center of Sustainable Transportation, I'm going to say NCST from now on. We are a consortium. Those are our partners. UC Davis is the lead. And I am housed, so we're pretty much where NCST is housed, and that's where I am as the policy director. And I do want to take this time too, because I meet different staff from the different agencies, and they always want to know, how does NCST relate to PH&EV Center or ITS? There's always this confusion. Some of you are smiling, so you're like, yeah, I know, I'm confused. So I want to take this moment to say that the ITS, Institute of Transportation Studies at Davis, is the lead for this national consortium. We have at ITS, we also have these other research centers like the Plug-in Hybrid Electric Vehicle Center. We have the STEPS program, which is Sustainable Transportation Energy Pathways program. And those are all research centers at the Institute of Transportation Studies. And really the centers are there partially for funding reasons, because there's focus, or those centers represent a specific focus of research. So there's different reasons why you have those research centers. But whenever you hear of NCST or PH&EV Center, STEPS program, you can just think ITS Davis, if that's helpful. Just think ITS Davis, because we're all one family out there. But again, these research centers are just different, again, focuses and such. So I hope that clears up some of it, because I know that they have a lot of questions. NCST is a little different because we do have other university partners. We're not purely ITS Davis, but we are the lead, and so we're doing half of the work, if that's helpful. That's what lead means, is that you get a larger portion of the share of dollars. So here's our funding partners. A lot of you are in the room. We tried to get some US DOT people here, but they just didn't make the trip, unfortunately. But maybe we can snag them at our other briefing that we're going to have. So I already covered this. This is, again, just talking about our mission goal, what we're trying to do. Our research areas are up here. So the first one, the low carbon infrastructure and efficient system operation. So So we're looking at how can we build our infrastructure better, use less carbon, et cetera. How do we operate that system so it can operate more efficiently, emit less greenhouse gas emissions, save fuel, et cetera. We're going to have a briefing on April 6th. Some of you might know about. You're all invited to attend. That's going to be featuring some of our recent research in that area. And that will be John Harvey, who's the director of the UC Pavement Research Center. He's doing some really interesting stuff. Alyssa and John actually co-authored a recent white paper that has the best of the best, latest thinking on life cycle assessment for greenhouse gas emissions for pavement. If I did not know much about pavement, I read that white paper, I talked to John and Alyssa, I'm a fan now. So if you want to get excited about pavement, you have to come meet John Harvey. Am I right? Alyssa's going to back me up. John Harvey is one of the most exciting, just gurus of pavement you'll ever meet. And he is going to be also presenting alongside him is Matt Barth. And he's from UC Riverside, so we're really excited to have one of our partners up here. And he's doing a lot of the ITS, Intelligent Transportation System Solution stuff. So the vehicle-to-vehicle communications, vehicle-to-infrastructure communications, doing a lot of eco-driving. So, and he also recently finished up a white paper trying to, again, bring together the state of the knowledge, current literature review of everything around ITS solutions that reduce fuel consumption and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So he's pulling that all together in his white paper, and that's up on our website. You can download that, and then he'll be here April 6th to talk more about that. And then our second batch of research is looking at low impact travel and sustainable land use. That's where we put our bike, ped, and transit. We're also doing research looking at sustainable development patterns. We have a project we're kicking off just right now with Caltrans, and one of our research is also part of an ARB project looking at developing indicators, so you can actually see if state regional policy like SB 375, sustainable community strategies, if that's actually having an impact on the ground. So it's developing these indicators so we can track that, if it's having an impact on local plans, and are those local plans having impact on the actual buildings and developments that are built. And then our third one is why we're here today. So it's a transition to zero-emission vehicles and fuel technologies. Today we're talking about light-duty vehicles, but we're also looking at freight. We're looking at transit. We're looking at specific fuel pathways. So we have research on hydrogen, biofuels, and even looking at natural gas. I'm thinking if I'm missing any. I think those are the primary ones. And so we're really excited today to have Tom and Alyssa with us. They're doing some work in this area, and so you'll hear more from them soon. And across all of these, we're funding work in institutional change. So we know that in order for some of these changes to occur, the policies and regulations have to change too. So we're specifically looking at what are those levers that need to go up or down, right or left, to facilitate some of those changes. So all of you hopefully picked up a packet of all of our research. So this is, to our best ability, all of the research that we're doing. It's hard to track some of this stuff sometimes because we have postdocs that are doing projects and other things. But this is our most recent summary of all of our research. We have over 60 projects going on right now. They're organized by each of our themes. So you can dig into this. It has start and end dates so you know where that project is, when it'll be wrapping up. If you have questions about any of the research, I have business cards up here, or just come nab me. And that's what you can use me for. Hey, I want to learn more about this, shoot me an email. I'm happy to find more information for you, find the right person, etc. And I think that might be it. Oh, and here's some of our engagement activities. So this is really my bread and butter. This is what I do. Again, trying to find opportunities to share the great work we're doing with practitioners and policymakers like yourself. We're really committed to ensuring that our research is relevant, timely, and valuable to those working in policy and practice. This is one way that we do this, is holding convenings like this and having conversations with you all to ensure that we know what those questions are that we should be answering. And then also hearing, having a discussion once we finish research, okay, so now what does this mean? Where do we go from here? But we're also on social media. I am learning how to Twitter. So you can go on there and follow us. We're pushing out all of our information there, as well as a lot of other fun stuff that's going on. We have national events, again, briefings like this one, as well as over at the Capitol. And then also on the last, we do have a leadership council made up of state DOT leads, MPOs, and others that provide us guidance overall and let us know if we're on mark or off, and providing us direction. And so we're really thankful to have them, for our leadership council, have them on board. There is my contact information and my email and our website. So again, on our website, you can go on there. All of our reports are posted. We have our policy briefs. I believe we have over close to 12 or 15 now policy briefs. Again, they're one-pagers, high-level results. So we hope that will help some of you have the time to actually read the research results, right? Not a 40-page paper where you have to carve out some time before bed and cozy in and see if you can shoehorn that in. So on that, I want to now invite Tom and Alyssa to come up. I mean, Alyssa, you can just stay there if you want, because Tom's going to be on the hot seat going first. So my introduction is going to be very rudimentary. Tom is the director of the Plug-in Hybrid Electric Vehicle Center, and he's going to be talking about the future of the ZEV market, where is it going, is it growing fast enough, and all of those great questions. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Tom.
Maybe you can get me on this computer to the right spot.
Oh, okay.
I'm a Mac user. I'm always
I am too.
unoriented to this.
This is a small group. They seem pretty forgiving.
Okay.
Is this it?
Yep.
All right.
It. Okay.
Okay. And then can you make it?
It's
you
over
got it?
here,
Okay.
right? Where's the little above? Oh. Okay. I'm not pushing the right button here. Oh, there we go. Yep. Okay, so I think a lot of you are familiar with our center. I hope I see a lot of familiar faces in the audience here. And we've been around for almost a decade now and working on this market. Just to let you know, most of our research is very focused on consumer response to these technologies and sort of, although our work always gets into a lot of areas, that is sort of the starting point for our work. Some of the main researchers, they're listed on the title. So just to let you know what we do over at the center, and we get very involved with national center projects all the time. We're working together with them. But we do have sort of a major division of labor over there in which Mike and Gil are looking at the buyers of these vehicles. Who are they? Sort of every 6 months to even a year, we're doing some sort of survey either in California or the United States, collecting as much data as we can. We collaborate even with other organizations like J.D. Powers or another data collector to collaborate on some projects on these buyers. Ken Karani is really looking at the broader market, those people who aren't buying the cars yet. Who are they? What do they know? What's their awareness, experience? What are they thinking about these new vehicles? What might they choose? Trying to look a little further in the future for them. This is a project that's now fully underway, primarily funded by CEC and ARB, to look at how vehicles are being used, how we're collecting data second by second on vehicles for a whole year, seeing how the vehicles, where it's charging, how the vehicle's operating, looking at things like how much energy is going to air conditioning. And over here in this corner, by the way, it's a household study. We study households, not individual vehicles, so we study all the vehicles in a household. That's the way we study it. We usually always focus on household and household decision making. We're doing a lot more world research now, getting some pretty good data sets together and looking at, I'll share some things from that. Just to give you an idea of a lot of this is very recent, so and funded by the state. Gil and Ken have completed interviews with almost 20,000 Americans over the last couple of years now, sort of punctuated surveys, and we're very fortunate. We're just signing a contract for another survey for 13 states in the United States. So we're developing this longitudinal view where we're asking questions over every year, and we'll have see what the changes are as we move forward. And of course, Ken runs a lot of interviews and workshops to enrich the qualitative aspects of that work. Mike, this is the 1 year of data. Eventually it'll be, we have about 75 households. Eventually we'll have 240 households. This could grow though. There is interest from other federal agencies to maybe expand this project, where we're actually has to do a lot of engineering, so we actually have to put data collectors on board vehicles, design those. You know, if you're going to collect data from a Tesla, for example, you got to develop a special device to do that. We don't take it from the manufacturer. Usually that doesn't work for those who think, why don't you just get it from the manufacturer? A or B can sometimes get some of it, but it doesn't always work, and we want to be an objective observer and have our own data. And then a lot of comparative work, working with researchers in other countries, and I'll show some things from that today. So just as a background here about electric vehicles, I'm really going to focus on electric vehicles as always. You know, it's just good to remind ourselves why we're here, increasing focus on carbon. This is from Paris, and just looking at that little bit of, we got just a little carbon before we get to the over 2 degrees, which is, we're trying to stay below that blue level, and yet we have all this oil, right? So if we do things the way we're doing it, we burn all that oil, we're going way over 2 degrees, and that's the challenge. Electric vehicles are being given a pretty big role in this right now. You know, there's a lot of arguments about, you know, what's the exact pathway in Davis. We try to study, we're always getting new information. You have a methane leak in Southern California. What do you do about leaking methane? It starts to change calculations about each fuel and things on electricity. But they are getting a pretty big, in Paris, where people were promising to do things, there was a lot of language about it, and then these are the promises, what people would do about transportation, and e-mobility was given kind of a pretty big role, promised by a lot of nations, so it's getting a lot of support, you know, as one of the solutions, although, you know, maybe actually biofuels may end up being bigger in the long run, but we'll see. E-mobility is getting a lot of support right now. You might notice also that it's from, a lot of that support comes from, compared to most fuel economy standards and e-mobility, from the wealthier nations. So this is California. You guys all see this, but I just want to point this out because the importance, we're working in this curve and we're working in this area right now, trying to get a little more detailed about 2030. The models show things out to 2050, but we're getting serious about looking. We know a lot about where we're headed for 2025, but 2030 is still pretty far out there. So I'm going to show you a little bit of sales to give it a framework. What's going on in the world of sales? So the world market's doing very well for electric vehicles, growing remarkably fast. It always does at the beginning, though. You know, the first few years are easy. It's easy to double your market when you're only selling a few vehicles. But actually, you know, 4 or 5 years into the market, we're showing steady growth and actually increasing growth right now, and probably 2016 may even show more faster growth than we're seeing this year from the early signs in the first quarter, and what some of the rollouts, mostly because the market really grows through rollouts as manufacturers make available new models and things for consumers, especially in models of vehicles they couldn't get before. And some of that's coming to the United States, which hasn't been in the market, things like small sport utility vehicles and things that are very, very high demand, were in the market, are coming to the market. Those have been available outside the United States, and sales are very good in those. We would expect, similarly in the United States, those markets have been growing very quickly for crossovers and small sport utility vehicles, if we can have electrics and plug-in hybrids in those categories.
Are leases counted as sales?
Leases, yes. Leases are counted as sales here.
And what if the lease ends and the vehicle is sold? Is that counted as a second sale?
Not in this. So used vehicle sales are not being counted in this. This is all new vehicle sales. And I'll talk a little bit about used vehicle sales.
Just so our webcast people can hear, maybe could you repeat?
Oh, can I repeat?
Yeah, kind of repeat the question.
The question, and can the webcast hear me because I'm walking around?
I think so. Natalie's delivering your email.
So the question was, what about leases that result after 3 years in used vehicle sales? That being recorded here. Only used, the leases are being recorded as new sales, but the the resale of that vehicle is being recorded as a used sale. Although it's not in these numbers. I'll talk a little bit more about that, and we're collecting a lot of data on that right now, actually, with another project with Air Resources. But if we look at the United States, unfortunately, the story is not quite as strong during the last year. The growth of the market, we had that kind of early growth, and now is it tapering off in the United States. Now we can explain some of this. Certainly, we all know that the price of gasoline has come down a lot in the United States, and the fuel economy of other vehicles is going up. So those people who are really motivated by the fuel savings, or cost savings from fuel from electric vehicles, maybe not as interested in these vehicles. That doesn't ring completely true to me for all of those, and although I know some of those sales are there, because this particular market segments are actually fairly high-income households for whom marginal differences in fuel costs are $2, $3 a week are almost meaningless, even though they may want good fuel economy. You wouldn't, from an economist standpoint, you wouldn't go, oh, this is something they should be paying a lot of attention to. It's a couple of lattes per week. So, but it certainly does affect the market. Other things are the availability of vehicles has actually dropped in the United States in certain vehicle categories. There were some model changes, and so there was probably some slowing during the middle quarter of 2015. California similarly has had a flattening. A lot of you may know this who work in this area. So we're kind of concerned. Also notice that battery electric vehicles are growing a little bit compared to plug-in hybrids. Again, the Toyota Prius plug-in dropping out of the market, the mid-year missing of the General Motors Volt really slowed the market at some periods for those types of vehicles, for PHEVs. Actually, we're going to get an explosion of PHEVs probably in the marketplace here pretty soon, and there's going to be probably 10, maybe even 20 new models in the market in a year and a half that are probably interesting to consumers. Oh, the other thing to pay attention to is the growth in the overall growth of the market. If you look at California light-duty vehicle sales, if we went back to when we started a lot of this work in 2008, 2009, sales were 1 million, maybe 200,000 vehicles in California. We're over 2 million vehicles now, back to the heydays of selling cars in California, so people are buying a lot of cars. Another thing to remember is, again, we asked about used car sales, and in California, in any one year, 2/3 of car sales are used car sales. So new car sales really only account for 1/3 of transactions. This is just to highlight a few things about the international market. First of all, USA has the most vehicles now registered over the last 5 years of this new market. California has a big chunk of those, almost half. China is suddenly showing a lot of sales. If you look right next to it, actually China almost had twice as many sales last year as the United States. Rapid growth due to incentives, and they have a sort of a particular structure to their automotive industry. A lot of local manufacturers in regions who have requirements from the government. But some interesting, Netherlands is an interesting country where they've offered a lot of incentives, and you see some really high, almost 10% of the market last year. They had these skyrocketing sales in December in Netherlands, always, and then the tax laws change, for the next year, and it'll look different. It already drops off in January. But Norway is always the great story. Getting up into 20% of sales is what we really want to do in California over a much longer period of time, but Norway, with really powerful incentives, has pushed a market. It's remarkable in a country which has, very cold weather, operation to develop this kind of market. Very impressive, and so the rest of us can't use too much as excuse if we want to do this, and Norway can do it. The other thing that should be said is Norway does have very clean electricity and very high incomes. So, and they have very high taxes on vehicles, what they can just take away in order to create a favorable condition. A number of other countries kind of stumbling along behind. Germany is a big car market, but has very low incentives so far and not very good sales yet, considering their car makers are very involved. So another piece of the market is just, we're talking about policy here today, and it's really important to point out the ratio between plug-in hybrid sales and battery electric sales across the world, Netherlands is really the plug-in hybrid capital. It's almost not, this is as a percentage of their sales that are battery electric. You can see the Netherlands is down around 15% of their sales are battery electrics. That will shift this next year because of shifts in incentives. So policy, though, you can see some shifts also in countries moving towards plug-in hybrids. A trend that's pretty common in the market right now because automakers are offering a lot of plug-in hybrids. The United States is going the other way because they weren't offering plug-in hybrids for sale in the US. So these numbers are heavily affected by what's available in the market and policies. Policy has driven battery-only sales in France and Denmark and Norway, whereas in Netherlands you're getting plug-in hybrids. And these are, the differences between Shanghai and Beijing, you see some of these around the world, those differences. I'm going to say some quick things about the challenges and opportunities here. And Laura, can you help me keep track of time? I can see a big clock, but I didn't.
Yeah.
When did I start? I forgot the.
At 1:30.
Okay, so and I can talk about 30 minutes, 25.
Yeah, 20, 25. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to present some of Gil Tall's work here pretty quickly. I want to get to that, but I want to go over these challenges. So because all of you are thinking about policy. So we have the slow turnover of fleet, actually probably slowest in California and Norway of any of those countries that we saw. Actually, there's policies in countries like Japan and Germany to speed up that turnover because they're heavy automaker countries and they force the turnover of vehicles in order to sell more vehicles. They have policies. So we can accelerate the turnover of the fleet. Of course, what happens to those cars? Japan sells them in Russia, in Ireland, in Indonesia, so they have a market where those cars do go. So on a global warming greenhouse gas, maybe that doesn't help. But it does speed up the turnover of that fleet. The low cost of gasoline is a big challenge now, how we may face low prices for decades. And that's pushing much larger vehicles in the market, which had a perverse effect in that people they're with lower fuel prices are attracted towards these sort of larger vehicles which have better fuel economy. We don't have very many plug-in vehicles in those larger vehicle categories. And that just makes this roll out into all these other product classes like crossovers or, you can think of small vans that we would like to see, or even regular sized vans we'd like to see vehicles in. There's also a rate of development of consumer awareness. Dr. Croney has been looking and measuring this in some detail in the US, and it's, I think, shock to everybody who's doing work in this area now, venture in the field, find out how slow this information actually finds its way into the market, and especially experience. People don't have experience with the product. They're not going to get it till they drive the vehicle, use the vehicle. Electric drive vehicles refuel differently, they drive differently, and they feel, so it requires some experience. That the spread of that experience through the population is much slower than we might imagine. Those of us who are kind of in the bubble of knowledge. And this uneven development of charging infrastructure, we have congestion in Norway and California and some of these advanced markets where they have a lot of vehicles, workplaces and other places, people wanting to charge at work. A lot of that's driven by free electricity at work. If it's free, people don't charge at home, and they go to work. You see that all over the world, that pattern. Also, we have a high use of coal in many areas around the world, and this could impede this market. We still don't have clean electricity in everywhere we would like. Hopefully, the goal is, of course, by 2050 to clean up most of this coal. There's great news from China of speeding this up, and there's hardly been any investment in coal in the last 4 years in new coal production. So those are some of the good news. The dynamics of this market, Gil Tall always shows this slide. He and I looked at this early on, and when we talk about policy and we want to change this market, this is a very important slide. The new car market and leases are driven by a very small group of Californians or Americans with pretty high income. They tend to buy a lot more cars. So you can think proportionally, just think if some people buy, when we interview people, we find people buying 2 or more cars over a 5-year period. their impact on the car market is much greater than households that buy only one car, especially most people who don't buy any new cars. So the car market's really being shaped by some small, and surprisingly 7% do 35% of purchases in a period. So that just, we kind of think about this. This is a classic market development curve, innovation, especially when we have new technologies. I've kind of put some different names on it. There's something up here called the chasm. I'll show that in a minute. And this becomes very important as we think about developing this market. And this is the chasm. And you think back to California starting to have a slump in its sales of the US. Japan's shown that similarly. Both Japan and California got into this early on. A little bit of worry maybe among those of us who study the markets. There's this chasm theory in technology that you sort of have all these innovators, and then there's a chasm in between them and practical buyers, and getting across that chasm, you can fail. You may not make it. So you have to really aggressively market in this period, throw out all the stops and aggressively market your product, because especially when we want to get the price of batteries and technologies down, and that might not happen until the mid, 2025, we may have a period in here when we've kind of used up these people who really like new stuff and are willing to pay for it, and we got to go to the people who really like the same stuff or want familiar products and want it at a good price. We may have a difficult period. So this is the curve. I've showed, many of you have seen this, so I'm going to go through it pretty quickly. I always show that we're in this area. This is based, as I always say, on a rollout of HEVs in Japan. We're sort of in this period. Actually, California is at 3%, so we're actually doing pretty good. We're going along, and here we've got to find, though, the next, to 2020, we've got to find 500,000 people. Is that what we're looking for? We've got to sell. How do we get there? And then 800,000 people to get to California's goals. And then we're starting to think about fourth generation vehicles and batteries, and a much bigger group of buyers, millions. But first we got to get through these 500,000. How might that happen? I can show a little more detail. So, this is what we're in this stage right here. If we're following that model, it's obviously not a perfect model, but we use it. I've tried a lot of different things. It seems to work. But this is really, it's a little more complex than that. Actually, these people end up buying because they're wealthy. They're going to buy a big chunk of these, and they're already doing it. When we look at them, they already have 2 cars in their households. A lot of these, these are your early. This next market is taken up by them, but suddenly you have the used market growing at the same time. And so maybe there's 400,000 people we're looking for between 2015 and 2020. Ken Croni's recent work, studies of all these states looking for these people, among those people who haven't bought, over their housing. Do they have the proper housing? Do they have the right type of vehicle? What kind of percentage might we expect them to buy over this period of time? And some responses to surveys that we've done. He counts in California about 1.5 million people who could be candidates for those, potential for those 400,000. So that's pretty good news. And so Ken's kind of been tracking them through the 2 or 3 surveys. But I'm going to show you now Gil stuff because we're going to talk about the incentives part, right? And people are here for incentives, and I'm almost completely out of time here. So I'm going to have to go a little bit quickly. I'll skip over his outline. I'm going to talk about the federal tax credit and people's response to that. So it's a specific kind of incentive, originally designed around battery size. It was the United States wanted to develop a battery industry, so they built incentives around giving, awarding tax credits to consumers for buying vehicles with different size batteries. It topped out at 16 kilowatt hours. Maybe had something to do with the General Motors Volt, I don't know. They didn't give credits above that, though. And in a study that Gil's in, is cut off the top of the screen here. I don't know if I can change that. This is a very interesting slide. So thinking about how much does that federal tax credit add? And a bunch of detailed survey work he did for every $1,000. So this is that's what's cut off. For every $1,000 of federal money, how much change do you get? So the Nissan Leaf, you get a lot of added sales. This is because Nissan Leaf drivers, and I'll click another thing here to show out of Gil's work. So I'm showing you Gil's work. I'll try to answer as best I can how he did this. But a Tesla, a very expensive car. Tesla drivers didn't rate very highly. Also, the role of incentives in their purchase. You don't get very many Teslas. It costs a lot of money for each additional Tesla. So the Leaf's an efficient way of using money. This is if you wanted to get, but if you were aiming at batteries, this was aimed at batteries, right? This federal tax credit, how many more batteries you get per $1,000. And then how much EVMT, that's the other thing we're measuring. Like how many, depending on your $1,000, how much, that's our goal eventually, is electric vehicle miles traveled substituted for how many miles. Tesla again does Leaf does well, so does the Volt. Does very well in delivering electric vehicle miles traveled. This just is to show us about those incentives that may have to last a long time. Now this is an old study, it's a National Academy of Science study. There's some newer studies that are a little more optimistic. The price of batteries is going down faster than this group of scientists thought at the time. But nevertheless, the point is, they're using, Lou and Gil are using this for their calculations because it's a very well-documented study. It looks like, even up to 2030, they're showing, prices that are not close enough, right? So incentives could be required all the way up. If we're going to make the prices equivalent, and think about those generations of buyers, we may have to have some incentives that go pretty far out into the future. Gil shows you then how much these actually buy. Again, that efficiency of every $1,000. So out here, in expensive vehicles, unfortunately, you don't, like Teslas and stuff, it's not efficient. As you move up to less costly vehicles, so we have a public finance issue here where I actually am, that's one view of it. So there's a tension, though, in the marketplace here in that, as I was showing, the most likely second-generation buyers, from everything we see, are probably going to still be pretty high income. They're going to want vehicles with a lot of bells and whistles on them. That's in the upper end of the market, sort of above $35,000. That's where there's more profit in car companies. Ken's work shows that that's probably who it is. So we sort of have this saying the upper end of the market is where the innovation, new products come. That's where you can maybe make a lot of change. On the other hand, the public finance side, Gil stuff showing, it's more effective to actually spend it down on the lower end of the market. It's a curious problem. We'll have, and equity, of course. We're all interested in equity. How do we deal with that? Although most of those people buy used cars with lower incomes. So we have tension in this future. So this is the study I think that I was supposed to talk about most. I'm going to have to do it very quickly here. What Gil and Lou Fulton have done is they've tried to say, okay, how much money do we need to collect to continue to pay these incentives in California? So they just took the CBRP, projected out in the future, and said, well, it looks like out in the future we're going to need about $200 million a year. Some of you might know more about that than we do or I do. I think this is a simple calculation. Then they wanted to look for some different ways to collect that. They studied what would happen. Here's 6 different scenarios they created to collect that $200 million in fees. And I'm not going to go over all those, obviously don't have time. I just want to alert you to that work. So that study's available right now, that paper. So some of these are where you don't charge, big thing is equity. You're not going to charge fees to people with, sort of poor people with buying a large pickup truck or a large van who have a big family. You're not going to, if their income's down. These are just sort of like everybody pays everything. It's pretty flat. You could view that as fairly regressive. Yeah?
Is this proposing registration fees for cars?
Yeah, I think so. I'm not actually aware. They were telling me schooling me on these slides, and it's around $200 to $400 per vehicle, and I think it'll be in either at the time of purchase. I don't know if it's an annual fee, but it probably has to be, it might be at time of purchase. I'm thinking it was at time of purchase. Yeah, okay. Alyssa knows about it. So here's a second slide, and the last slide I'll end up showing, I think, because I'm out of time. This just shows you the two of the scenarios. You get these people out here, their CO2 per mile is pretty high. One scenario doesn't, they don't have to pay if you've got low income. And another scenario, they show the lower income do pay. And what are your outcomes? How much that shifts the price per vehicle according to how polluting that vehicle is. So this is the one half of a fee-bait program, right? Raise that money for rebates. Okay, the rest is about HOV lane access, so I'm not going to get there. I'll just say quickly that Gil's conclusions in this area and some of his work point to more efficient use of incentives. And I'll show and so this whole thing on HOV, a lot of you may be aware, but plug-in hybrids are using the HOV stickers, and it really is very attractive. Actually, those who have very small batteries, and so we're not getting a lot of EVMT out of them, even though they're getting HOV lane stickers. So he has some suggestions about being more efficient. I think he wanted me to say the main thing was, don't make that sticker last. Make that sticker only last 2 or 3 years, so we can recycle that, because we have to do incentives for a long period of time. If we fill up the HOV lanes now quickly, we won't have ability to incentivize those later on. They're very effective incentives. I'm going to go to Gil's last slide here pretty much. His main point was that, and he sort of supports this through both survey work and some other work he's done, that the monetary surveys are reaching about 25%. He's showing a big range there depending on several studies. Are reaching 25 to 50% of buyers need that monetary incentive to make that decision. HOV lanes, another 5 to 20% need those HOV lanes to make that decision. One of his points is, though, not everybody needs all three. So right now, everybody's getting all of these incentives, whether it's all three incentives. Some don't need any incentives. We need to be a little more efficient in giving choices, making sure that those people who need the monetary get them, but if they don't need HOV or they don't need infrastructure, we're not spending money on them. Okay, that's it. I'll stop finally.
Okay. Great, thanks, Tom.
I know it's cutting off at the top. Natalie, did you know? Natalie checked on that. It's just cut. We're just going to have to use our imaginations, it sounds like. Oh, they can see it on the webcast? All right. Well, then that's their incentive, right? They're going to be like, well, we're going to do webcast from now on. We get to see the whole slide. Okay, let me pull up Alyssa's, and then we're going to have Alyssa present, and then we'll have more conversation, and you can ask questions. But if there are questions, I'm sure, during Alyssa's presentation, please ask them. So I think this is Alyssa. So Alyssa, as she stated in her intro, she is, I need to get this right, I know she just told me, Associate Professor of Civil Environmental Engineering at UC Davis. What was that?
I was looking for the mouse to get it up.
Oh.
If you do that.
Oh, there it is. There's the mouse. It's a team effort here. Did it do it? There we go. Okay.
Hi, well, I'm going to talk a little bit about life cycle-based emissions and potential policies around that for light-duty vehicle standards. But I'm actually going to tell a story instead of telling you the results, because this is a pretty new project. My area of expertise is in life cycle assessment, and so my first job out of college was actually as an automotive engineer working on early electric and hybrid vehicles, and it inspired me to actually pursue work in life cycle assessment. And I would argue that historically life cycle assessment hasn't actually been important for cars. If we look at a conventional vehicle with a gasoline engine, operation and combustion, right? So operation of the vehicle and combustion of the fuel really dominates the impacts of our car, whether it's energy use, greenhouse gas emissions, or air pollution. But if we start looking at other potential fuels where the fuels themselves are dirtier during production, like oil shale, or if we look at biofuels where it's all about the upstream and not about what's coming out of your tailpipe, at least for greenhouse gas emissions. And if we look at future vehicles, and future vehicles here is writ large, meaning future vehicles, advanced vehicles that might use advanced lightweighting technologies, as well as advanced powertrain technologies, the production emissions can be much bigger. They're much bigger not just because production has gotten bigger, but our cars have gotten more efficient during operation, right? So this is a relative value. And of course, if we look at electricity, it's all about the upstream as well. So we don't want to miss the upstream for electricity either. So for those of you who aren't familiar with life cycle assessment, the idea is that we look at a product or a system and we start from wherever we get the raw materials to build or produce or make that system all the way through the end of life. And we're tracking material, energy, and resources going in and the waste and pollution coming out over the whole system, the whole supply chain. So I often tell my class that it's kind of like, for people from Caltrans, you've done life cycle costing, or at least are familiar with it probably. It's like that, but we're tracking energy flows, so material and resources in and waste and pollution out, instead of dollar flows. So biofuels, I know there are plenty of people in this room who know about biofuels and life cycle assessment, but they're probably the most studied product category, at least for life cycle greenhouse gas assessment. In a real life cycle assessment, we track lots of different impacts. We don't just talk about greenhouse gas emissions. We don't want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions a whole lot and cause some other environmental effect which is intolerable, right? So usually we would look at everything. But especially for greenhouse gases, biofuels have really been the most studied product category. They're also the most subject around the world to life cycle based regulations. So the low carbon fuel standard is of course probably the gold standard for life cycle based regulations, but around the world we have other interpretations of life cycle based standards for biofuels. So we can learn a lot from the history and maturation of life cycle greenhouse gas assessment for biofuels if we want to think about applying it to another complex product system, especially one like cars that actually use those biofuels. So, of course, the idea for biofuel, well, the idea of why people looked to biofuels originally is that petroleum fuels basically use fossil oil and cause fossil CO2 emissions to the atmosphere, right? And the idea for biofuels is that you're pulling out that CO2 from the atmosphere, fixing it in a plant, and then you're turning it into a liquid fuel. It turns out plants don't want to be liquid fuels, so there's a lot that goes in there to make it happen, and sending that CO2 back to the atmosphere. But early studies of biofuels didn't really consider this. They were looking at things like net energy. They didn't really focus on some of the other environmental effects of biofuels production. So if we think about growing the feedstock, for example, we have major impacts associated with growing the feedstock. We have to turn that feedstock into a fuel, and like I said, plants don't usually want to be liquid transportation fuels. And then we actually have to move it around and put it into cars. And at each step, we have other kinds of emissions. But what I want to point out here is coming in the next slide, which is that when we first started using life cycle assessment to look at fuels, we actually had very narrow view of what was important to track. So we started by looking at the systems I've highlighted here in red. And that means that we ignored important sources of emissions, like field-related nitrous oxide emissions, which for some feedstocks can be 60% of the emissions associated with producing it. And the reason is that we weren't really interested in greenhouse gas emissions, and the engineers that knew about factories weren't talking to farmers or soil scientists that knew about the nitrous oxide emissions. So as we learned more, we grew the system that we looked at, and not only did we start including field nitrous oxide emissions, people started talking about land use change, mostly direct land use change, and then eventually we made it to indirect land use change effects. Now, for biofuels, the indirect effect that's most important is probably land use change, but for any system, it could be something different, right? An indirect effect is caused by sort of economic signals that happen in the market and cause something else to happen. You can imagine that as a life cycle assessment person, you could actually have an infinitely expanding assessment unless you decided what was important or not, right? So in the case of biofuels, we've decided that land use change effects are the most important indirect effect to consider. So the reason I'm telling this story is that along the way, we probably made decisions that weren't great ones because we hadn't expanded that system boundary enough. So what I'm trying to argue for is that we do better than this. We know better now, right? We should keep this system boundary really large when we think about analyzing a system and understanding what the true effects are, but then also thinking about what we want to see in the long term. This was just to show how important these indirect effects are. This is just LCFS data for approved pathways, and I just wanted to highlight that down below you see the Brazilian sugarcane ethanol, and that the land use change, which is shown in the brown bars there, is actually bigger than the other direct emissions, right? So if we had left that out, we would be totally wrong about the impacts, right? Assuming that these are right. Okay, so passenger vehicles. Like I said, in the past, operation has been what it's all about, right? It's all about operating your car. It's not about how you produce it when it comes to really understanding the sort of magnitude of impacts associated with the vehicle. So these are just older studies looking at conventional internal combustion engines on gasoline. So a few years ago, excuse me, a student and I did a study of a potential future vehicle. Some of you guys might be familiar with this Lotus Engineering study. They did a lightweighting study in a few different powertrains. We adapted what they did, and we basically looked at two potential vehicles. Both of them have a hybrid powertrain, but one of them uses what they call a high development body, and the other one uses a low development body. The low development body was mostly steel, like a conventional vehicle, and the high development body used lots of different kinds of lightweighting materials. All of them were off the shelf at the time. Okay, so the big picture here is that the lower development case, where they used this heavier steel body, increased fuel consumption by 3 miles per gallon. Now, having been an automotive engineer, I know I could have gotten paid money directly from my company if I had been able to save 3 miles per gallon. In fact, you got every 10th mile per gallon, you got like a $1,000 bonus or something, and this was a long time ago. So in any case, the point is 3 miles per gallon is actually a pretty significant savings. This is for a pretty large crossover vehicle, the Toyota Venza. So we took these two different bodies, and we did our own model because we didn't use their fuel economy because we had adapted some different things. But we used conventional engineering calculations to estimate the fuel economy effects of lightweighting or adding weight. And we came up with these results where we showed that in both, whether we used a 16-year lifetime or 11-year lifetime, we actually found that the lower developed vehicle, meaning the heavier vehicle, performed better on a life cycle basis. This performance being better changed, right, as the vehicle life extended, you started seeing this improvement shrink. One thing I'm not showing here is that some of my work examines emissions timing, meaning how important emission today is versus 11 years from now. And when we overlay that on this, it just accentuates the problem, right? So I haven't included that because it's pretty complicated to argue for, but it just exacerbates this problem. So this research, first of all, I should say it really surprised us. We weren't fishing, and we were really surprised. Now, the design we picked was magnesium intensive. Magnesium's really bad. There were probably other lightweight designs that could have been that you could have come up with that would have been much better. But the idea was, if you didn't have this information as a vehicle manufacturer or designer, why would you pick different materials, right? So the question is, can we include life cycle-based policies that drive improvement at the production and design stage as well as the operation stage? So this got us interested more in materials. We realized there was very poor data on a lot of materials, lightweighting materials and materials used in advanced powertrains. And so I got a grant from the National Science Foundation to actually develop new data around these materials, which we're still working on. One of the key aspects of that, though, is that we're predicting into the future how those materials look environmentally. And the reason that's important is that if you increase demand all of a sudden, what you were doing 10 years ago doesn't match what's going to happen 20 years from now when your demand is 10 times higher, right? So we're trying to actually account for that when we develop future technologies. We also want to account for improvements over time, right? So we're also trying to include technology improvement. So this led us to look more at electric vehicles. Of course, one of the key issues with electric vehicles is it matters where you charge it. But there are also other location effects. So in addition to where you charge it and when you charge it, you also have climate effects on performance. This happens for all cars, right? But electric vehicles are more pronounced in some cases than conventional vehicles. So I partnered with some economists. I always announce that because they did all the marginal electricity modeling, so I'm not going to pretend expertise in that area. But the big takeaway here is that they actually modeled it at lower than the grid level. It was at the state level. But the grid dominates in these pictures. But we looked at seasonality on the grid. So I'll just point out two. You'll see the two that I've put comments on. You can see that the upper Midwest is dark red. That's the highest CO2 emissions per, or greenhouse gas emissions per megawatt hour produced, and that it's more greenhouse gas intensive in the winter than in the summer. Okay, and that's because of their the changes in demand and marginal electricity fuels, the fuels used on the margin. Okay, there's this other effect. So we have seasonality, and then we have spatial differences in electricity, right, that causes different emissions. We also have other effects that weather can have on vehicle performance, so cold weather effects. There are two major ones for electric vehicles. One, batteries operate a little differently in the cold, so it takes a little more energy to charge, and for every unit of energy you get out, you actually have to expend a bit more from the battery. These are not enormous, right? They're in the 10 to 20% if you add them all together, sometimes lower. And then the other big issue is that you need to provide cabin heating and defrost from an electric battery. So you usually have a resistance heater, so think toaster oven in terms of efficiency, right? It's not the best way to provide heat. You don't have wasted heat from the engine. So this is a challenge. Lots of caveats for this study. I mean, so many caveats, but one important one on the technology side is that it doesn't account for technology improvement. So there's been a lot of talk about, for example, heat pumps being integrated in electric vehicles, which would at least make these processes more efficient. The data that I used for this model is out of date. It was cold weather testing conducted in Canada on leafs. So these were like 2010 or 2011 leafs. So things have certainly and probably gotten better and may continue getting better. So if we look at replacing all new vehicles that are sold in a state, there's a lot of complexity under here, including average VMT and when driving happens, whether it's cold at night and all these other things. But the takeaway here is that everything is blue, and in my model, blue means that you're doing better than a conventional internal combustion engine vehicle. We did not compare it to a hybrid or something, so we didn't look at the full suite of technology options. But every place looks better to have an EV. But when we include climate effects, and because I was working with economists, you have to include rebound effects, things look worse. And I will say rebound effects were much smaller than the climate effects in this case. Things look very different. Now, California and most of the West, Florida and some of the Northeast, all still look like places to sell EVs. And you might ask why Maine looks so good, given that it's cold. And the answer is that they have a lot of hydropower from Quebec. So that's why. If you look at the upper Midwest, though, and parts of the mid-Atlantic, it is not a good idea. Anything in the red tones is basically worse. And the primary reason is that on the margin, you have coal-fired power in these regions, and you have cold weather. So there are two things. One, this is, for someone like me who's a proponent of life cycle-based regulations, this is a major headache. Okay, how do you argue for life cycle-based regulations when you have this kind of heterogeneity across the country? On the other hand, if we can get around that, if we can find a way to actually do it, we might be able to make really much better decisions about where to really promote technologies, right? So this is a mixed bag for someone like me in terms of outcomes. I mean, it would have been better if it all looked blue, right? Make this easier. But on the other hand, it's also important to say, actually, maybe it's not a good idea over here right now. And I say right now because a lot of our continuing work is about trying to project into the future. We certainly don't want to argue for preventing the rollout of technologies when they're immature just because we want to prevent them now because something that's, a competing technology right now is better. We want to look to the future as well. But this was really revealing, I think, because life cycle studies previously had not looked at cold weather effects. There was a study that had looked at battery degradation effects for heat, but there hadn't been any looking at cold weather effects. I should add that the battery is really unimportant. So when people ask you whether or not like EVs are bad because of the battery, you can tell them the battery is just not a big part of the life cycle impacts. So that's kind of another revealing factor. We tested all these different battery replacement rates and it just didn't matter. Okay, so ongoing research. I already sort of revealed my challenge of this heterogeneity over space and time and still the desire for life cycle based regulations. The other question we always have to ask, are they needed and would they be effective? The would they be effective part is about, depending on how you implement them, they may or may not be effective. We know that you can come up with a perverse outcome. if you don't include upstream emissions from producing a vehicle, but are those perverse outcomes big, right? And is the burden of this complex regulation really worth it? And then the other part of this is we're working really hard right now to develop new life cycle data to look at future materials and future technologies so we can project into the future and do a better job of modeling that out into the future. So hopefully I kept that short enough. Okay, and I guess we're ready for questions up here. Yeah?
Sorry, I just had a question about one of your charts.
Sure.
The one that was about like gas versus biofuel, where it's like use versus land use, and like.
Oh yeah, the low carbon fuel standard chart.
Right.
Uh-huh.
That one. Yeah, I guess I was wondering why for gasoline there's like not really a land use factor when people like have like oil fields, and it does take a lot of land to.
So yeah, there are two answers to that. One is that this is, most of these are indirect land use change effects. These are induced land use change effects, meaning if I divert a crop and use it for biofuels, it induces land use change somewhere else. That's part of it. So the other part is that I'm 99% sure in the GREET model that they use, there are no land use effects of gasoline. It's not included. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm more familiar with the biofuel side than the gasoline, but I'm pretty sure they haven't included that. And it would be small relative to, like per gallon of fuel produced relative to biofuels. It would be a very small number.
Okay, well let's, thank you Alyssa and Tom. So now we do have some time for questions. Again, we're a small group, so this can be informal. I think, does Natalie, we are going to have the microphone because some are participating via webcast. So with that, I'm really interested who has a question, who would be the brave soul to have their first question. So what do people think? Are you just sitting and mulling and stewing in it? Anything provocative or new that was presented?
I was wondering, oh, sorry. I was wondering, you were talking about, I think, which European country you were talking about, that was very Norway, thank you.
Is that it?
No, no. About Norway, you said that they are successful, they have 20% EV. What was
Maybe
the,
higher.
maybe even
I
higher?
actually put a lower number because I couldn't believe the number I saw last, and I had to double check it, but a recent number said 23% of the market.
So what kind of incentives did they use?
So there's every incentive in the book. Norway has a broad set of incentives. There's two things about Norway. First of all, and I think are important, as is in California, is it's not just the incentives. There's a sort of a history behind it. Like California has clean air, and air resources have been doing things for a long time. Californians are actually, when we talk to Californians about electric vehicles, most of them don't think about carbon. They're all thinking about clean air. And they're very familiar, especially in Los Angeles, with the role of regulation in cleaning up the air. A lot of them, especially people, educated people who are higher income buying some of these cars. So they're very familiar with that story. Norway has a long history of trying to do something. They had a long lead up that began way back. And then they had, so there's history behind it. That's very important. Broad public knowledge because a rock band named AHA got involved with electric vehicles. Got enough of you who are old enough to remember. You know, I'm not going to sing the song, but take me on. So anyway, they were sort of the Beatles of Norway. And they got involved with trying to import electric vehicles, and so it made the front page for weeks while they were they couldn't register their car. Like their DMV said, we won't register an electric vehicle, and So it created a story, which then led to, and all the politicians, they want to be on the side of the rock band, so that it's like being with Bono, you know. So they signed up and they created all these incentives. So they started in with they have very high taxes on cars in Norway. If you buy an imported car, Norway does not manufacture vehicles. The taxes are almost double between value-added taxes that come on top of import taxes. So they just removed all that, you know, over various types of things, but there were no cars to buy. You know, there were a few Renaults, and so there was this sort of early history where people could buy, but the cars were lead acid batteries, horrible little things. And I don't know if anybody knows what a PEVCO is, but that'll be proof of that. And then as soon as the Leaf is developed, suddenly a car is available in the market, and people kind of knew a little bit about the incentives. There had to be more information. Still, even a lot of Norwegians were not that informed about this. It was a pretty small issue. But they had been on the books for a long time. That's actually one of the things we see. So there's two things. There's the size of the incentive, the coverage of the incentive across broad sectors of society so that it affects a lot of people. They also allowed people to drive in bus lanes, like we let people drive in the HOV lanes. And there were certain suburbs, so you see these suburbs outside of Oslo where the bus lane became very important and people could go into Oslo. And so the sales were very high for electrics. Free ferry rides, like if you Norway uses a lot of ferries, so they were able to drive their electric vehicles onto the ferries for free. Parking downtown, actually Oslo is a really nice town. There's not many vehicles in the center, and so you don't have to go. There's a lot of public transportation. They started to provide free charging in Oslo and some of the other cities. So there was just a broad set of things. I think they've done some things recently. Everyone belongs. There's an electric vehicle association that it was developed outside of government that provides membership in charging services and other things. And when you buy your car in Norway, you get a free membership. And this gives you all this other stuff to go with it. So they've just gotten organized over time. So they have a long lead up to it. They really threw the books at it. They have a sovereign capital fund from oil that amounts to, I think, about $150,000 per Norwegian, which is in the bank, and they use this for I don't know, what are they thinking? Health services, education, you know, they're wasting money. No, they're very rational people, and they invest oil money in a very rational way. So that's what they're doing.
Hello? Was it your Tom? I guess? At the bottom, you need to press. You can hold it for a while. Okay. There it is. There it is.
Great. Hi, Leslie Brody, Energy Commission. Nice presentations. I had some interesting thoughts about this combination of monetary incentives, non-monetary incentives, such as HOV, and then public infrastructure. And I'm just wondering if you've done additional thinking on how the trade-offs might occur in public funding, and also just how you got to the public infrastructure.
The numbers?
Yeah, the numbers on that.
So the number looks very low to a lot of people who are very familiar. Some for Leslie working hard, and this is like, oh my God, is this not making any difference? So what that was based on, that information may be the national survey. That's why we'd probably have to get Gil's details on that number, because I've looked at that number and went, you know, how was that? And I think it's what?
Free public charging? That's part of that criteria.
Right, of that 2 to 8% on the bubble?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's not access to public charging, but access to free public charging was what made the difference for them purchasing.
Yeah, there were a bunch of slides in there about if I did the charging part of Gil's, if I showed that, there was a lot of discussion of workplace charging too, and its role. So, and that was for the whole United States, that figure. So that was not focused on California.
So that might be conservative?
It could be conservative in, Yeah, the mix, how many vehicles, the survey sample had a lot of Volt drivers in it. So it had a larger proportion in that survey. We'd have to go back and look at some things. So I wouldn't focus too much on the 2 to 8%.
Okay.
Don't get too excited about that, but we could talk to Gil to get the details.
Yeah, I'd be interested in exploring that.
Okay.
Okay, there's an online question.
It's for Alyssa.
For Alyssa. Does heterogeneity go away as the Midwest moves away from coal? After all, similar climate in Germany is incorporating a much larger percentage of solar.
So, when we looked at, we did 2 different projections. One of them removed all coal from the grid, and then the other one looked at a different plan for decarbonizing or lower carbon grids. No, the heterogeneity sticks around a bit because none of our models included a whole bunch of renewables in that area. I'm sure, for the Great Lakes region, your best bet is probably offshore wind, and I'm sure if we had tested that, we would have seen really different results. Like Maine. Maine is a good example where you have similar climate and you have a pretty good outcome. But in terms of just removing the coal, because there was not a lot of other renewables in there, it looked better. But it still looked different than other parts of the country. And I should say, when we removed all the coal, every region did at least slightly better than a conventional vehicle with EVs. Right?
We replaced the coal with natural gas?
Yes, I'm pretty sure it was natural gas I'm pretty sure it was natural gas for everything.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much. And this is Tyson with GoBiz. And one of the things we've been thinking about a lot, is how batteries and hydrogen can play together, and we play to their strengths. And so I was wondering, in your life cycle thing, if you had a chance to look at hydrogen in the Midwest and see if that changes things, or in Northeast, or...
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I've actually never included hydrogen pathways in any of our life cycle models. So it's a good question for cold regions, whether that would make a whole lot more sense for, and probably it would.
Yeah.
But we didn't look at that.
Well, they generate their own heat, right? And so that...
Yeah, you would have a lot more, and you wouldn't have the same temperature effects, the same level of temperature effects, I guess, as some of the batteries.
Just be interesting from a policy perspective. You start pushing technologies into different areas, like try to play up all the plug-in in the areas where it makes the most sense, and hydrogen where it makes the most sense.
I think that's sort of the vision that I would push, given what we saw, right? That not every technology is going to be perfect in each region, but you could probably tailor incentives and other kinds of programs to try to encourage the right technology in the right region.
Especially with the fuel cell F-150, right in the Midwest and everything.
Hi again. I had a question about incentives, more specifically tax credits. I was wondering about sort of the idea from some surveys I've seen that, and sort of logically, that tax credits would be more of an incentive for higher income folks, because it would give them like more of a reduction. So I guess my question is that something that you think about, and also do you think that's a significant portion of why higher income people tend to buy more electric vehicles, or is it just because they're more expensive?
Certainly tax credits can be used more by higher income. Actually, the situation of variation that's useful to look at is the state of Georgia. So Georgia had some incentives in which they allowed a state tax credit, and what they did was allow you to take it over a 5-year period. So you could roll it forward and take it over a longer period of time. I guess really good for people whose income is going up. Maybe people's income haven't gone up fast enough in Georgia, but they nevertheless could take it over a period of time, and it was very successful. So if there's some evidence, I don't think that's been picked apart exactly. I mean, it's very complex people are getting a federal tax credit, they're getting state tax credits, in California they get a rebate, in Connecticut now they're getting What we actually most favor is on the hood, and they're experimenting with that. That means that the credit is made available at the point of sale instead of something you have to wait for. So people don't value things that they get 10 months later, you know. We can kind of intuitively feel that. It isn't, some people are different from other people, really want it right now, and other people are willing to wait. But it looks like, you know, that'll become actually, if it becomes available sort of to everyone rather than as a tax credit available on the hood, so that at the point of sale, salespeople are motivated to sell these vehicles more because they actually have something they can offer in closing a deal. And that's very effective. So that's being tried in Connecticut, and luckily we do these experiments in the United States between different states, and to answer your question, maybe that'll bring in. I don't think, the final point, does this really, why, you know, there's a lot of reasons why wealthier buyers have been buying electric vehicles. If we look in California, we have a lot of data about California. Most of them have been homeowners, so they have a place to park the vehicle, to charge the vehicle. They don't have, most of them have houses which have upgraded electrical access, so they don't have to add a circuit, or so they have they sort of have the infrastructure to do the vehicle. They have higher income. Actually, the vehicles are not that expensive. That's one of the things. We were talking about leases. The leases on some of these vehicles have been the same as a lease on an internal combustion, some of them even cheaper. So it's not the purchase price has not been it that's holding people back. Actually, you know, my experience since talking to so many households is really the amount of risk a household can take. So wealthier households can take more risks. They own more cars, they buy more they trade vehicles more quickly over. So they buy this car for a year and they go, I don't like that, and they get another car. Well, most of us, at least I don't do that. You know, I hold on to cars 7, 8 years. So I think that's actually, we're in that innovator set, and these are people who are attracted to new stuff. They can take more risk with their income. They have disposable income which can be used for experimenting. I think that's probably explains more than anything.
Do we have any other questions, Raul?
So I'm trying to, about a couple of months back, I think I read in one of those newspapers that the salesmen at car dealerships have lesser of an incentive to sell electric cars because they can't offer like free oil changes or whatever. So something to that effect. So I don't know, I mean, you know, I just kind of read in the passing, so I thought maybe if you have kind of really focused on the point of sale issues, any incentive for dealers to sell more electric vehicles?
It's a complex topic. If you're interested in that area, we have actually a dissertation just completed on that. So we did survey 60 dealerships in California with interviewed salespeople and the proprietors. Actually, it turns out the really important person to talk to is a sales manager at a dealership. Those are the people that determine what's being sold at any particular time. Dealerships are a very interesting place, and what's going on. The manufacturers have certain things they want to sell, so they're incentivizing those. Those are, and there's constantly offering. I mean, we talk about giving out money on, you know, California and we say, oh, this is incentivizing. I mean, that's what they do in the car industry all the time. All the time you'll see for an F-150, you can get $5,000 off if you come shop over here. Well, those sorts of things, and that's what I said on the hood. So at any one time, it's changing any day of the month at a dealership, but there are incentives that are available to the salespeople like you said, oil change. Now on electric vehicles, those have been incentivized by, and it'll just depend on the supply of those at any one time from the manufacturer. So if the manufacturer is offering an incentive, and then on the dealer lot, so let's say the dealer, because one of the things that independent dealer, they're independent from the car companies, right? That's a really important thing to understand. The car company is not allowed to sell, you have to sell through a dealership. So they're independent car, and they have their own incentives too. So the dealership has their incentives, and that depends on their inventory. So let's say they bought a whole bunch of Nissan Leafs. They pay for those. So every day it's sitting on the lot, they're paying for the financing and the space that vehicle's taking up at their lot. So if they have a bunch of them, as that, if it doesn't go fast enough, the dealership starts to incentivize those also, or pushing it, or getting their salesman, we'll give you $100, you move 3 of these cars, every one of them you get $100. There's a whole complex set of incentives at a dealership. It's fascinating what they're actually doing. Things like, you know, oil change and stuff. With electric vehicles, yeah, there is less of that, and that's a problem because dealerships, the basic model for a dealership is 1/3 of their money from sales of new cars, 1/3 of their money from sales of used cars, and 1/3 of their money from service. So service goes away with electric vehicles. This is one of the things they've been, also with a lot of new cars. The Prius has very little service, and dealerships complain they're not making money off of Priuses. They don't like that car from that standpoint. So they don't like electric vehicles because a Leaf only comes in once a year for its tires to be rotated. So, there are problems with electric vehicles in the current dealership model. That's why there is some talk about the dealership model, which was formulated in the 30s, may be outliving, although there's a lot of political power there in the service industry, sales industry.
All right, any other questions people have? Yeah.
Just have one question for Lisa. You mentioned that the environmental impact of gasoline, the land use impact is very little, and I can understand in some places it is. But with the life cycle, you go back to petroleum production and extraction. And if you look at places like Canada, where I have seen some horrendous pictures on oil shale, what it has done to land, have, at least at the regional level, the impact one would imagine that would be quite significant when land is treated like that.
Yeah, and I know that just a few years ago there was a study that looked at some of that. The reality is that for any given oil well, you're pulling out so many gallons of fuel that when you actually allocate it sort of over all of the fuel produced, I think you're still looking I mean, that was greenhouse gas emissions. If you looked at other kinds of toxic pollutants, you would get a different story. And that's part of my, I don't ever just do greenhouse gas emissions in my models because I don't want to just have that single story because there are other issues. But I think from a greenhouse gas standpoint, that's translating a land use effect into emissions associated with the land. So you disrupt the land, you release some carbon, and then you produce oil for decades. It's just going to look tiny. So maybe if you looked at some other toxicity-related impacts, you would have a different picture. So I haven't looked at oil sands in particular, but I do recall some studies out there on them that there certainly are lots of major regional effects, but I still expect you'd see a small sort of greenhouse gas-related impact associated with a particular land use change.
Our incentive people have been very quiet. So I might put you on the spot and see if either one, both.
Sure. It strikes me as we're in the trenches building incentives. And these studies don't seem to take into account the strings that are attached with the funds that are used to there it is. What happens is that we have certain parameters that we have to stay within. And so I don't really have a question, it's more of a comment. It would be helpful, I think, to have studies such as the ones you enumerated and others that we've seen, Karani and others, to be under the overall parameters that the funding that's available for incentives also operate. So that possibilities that really aren't possibilities aren't studied. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's my comment.
I think, yeah, I mean, our work is obviously focused on California, so understanding those constraints in California. One of them is, I mean, you look at how the constraints are. I mentioned Norway, which is really different, right? And I've looked a little bit at Japan, which was quite interesting because, and I liked hybrid electric vehicles were incentivized in Japan. They also got up over 20% sales of hybrid vehicles. There they have an industry which is very motivated, a lot of government control over sales and incentives and things. They did it through sales tax. They had reduced sales tax. But I understand that that's, from people who are in politics in California tell me, there's no way you're going to get a holiday on sales tax because that's part of the general funds for the state. So, when we're doing these studies, we like to stay, we want to focus on California. At the same time, we do want to look a little bit outside of the framework, the political framework, to understand, because like every state's a little bit different, how they raise money or how they spend it. So we're trying to be relevant also for the Section 177 states in particular, and states like Texas and Florida who are doing things completely differently. So I'd like to have some general results at the same time. Be nice to be able to be very cognizant of exactly what's the box
that we're
operating in. You have a very good point.
The other thing that strikes me is that just, I believe yesterday, is that right? That the higher rebates for low and moderate income individuals, and also the income cap. And so that's a big experiment right there that we're in the midst of. And so we'll see how that works.
It'll be interesting to see how it goes.
We're excited.
From what we see from Tesla drivers, it's not going to make, the upper end thing's not going to make a big difference.
Yes, hopefully. Yeah. And hopefully the lower end will make a big difference, and we'll see a huge uptake. So we're excited about that.
Tim, can I push you a little bit too? So your comment was to have the research focus on and understand and be aware of those parameters of that funding and what can be spent on. Could you be a little bit more specific of what you heard or that Tom presented? Maybe Tom already knows probably what you may be referring to, but I'm not sure I am or others are. So I was curious from your standpoint, who's actually on the ground, front and center working on this. So what part of the research that was presented that you feel, we can't do that here in California, or that the results weren't as helpful?
I don't want to speak for outside of my section. I mainly work with car sharing and pilot projects for car sharing. But the funding stream that I have to work with, we have to place it only in disadvantaged communities. And so if we were looking at ways to incentivize car sharing, we would, to really be effective for what I do, it would have to also have the overlay of disadvantaged communities, with a specific set of communities in California that are identified for their high exposure to pollutants and also their social economic status. But the other thing is we have all our rebates and incentives are all subject to a very rigorous public policy process. We have work groups, we have workshops, we seek input all the time. And so, we talk about point of sale being very effective, and it might very well be. But then we get feedback from stakeholders who are wary of those rebate funds being absorbed by the dealers and not really affecting the purchasers, especially in lower and middle income. There's equity and education aspects to that, and also privacy aspects. So once you tie in some of the overlays of income that we are now looking at for qualifications of rebates, to have that done at the dealership is a little bit tricky. So anyway, those just I tried to give you a few specifics.
Any response to Tom about point of sale and dealership? Are those all things you've heard? And
Yeah, I'm aware of the point of sale. I mean, dealerships, you know, are one of those, you know, interviewing hundreds of Californians, it's not their favorite place. People do not, they're scared of going to dealerships. They feel taken advantage of. They're walking into sort of a wolf's den, you know, as people would tell me. They feel that it's stacked against them going to a dealership. They don't know what's going on. They're toyed with. Dealerships are actually evolving pretty quickly at this same time. That type of dealership is, some of that's going to disappear. Dealerships are actually consolidating because of the internet, because so many people who come to a dealership now have information about the sales price of every car, the same car at 10 other dealerships. They even come with a bill of sale, which says, this is the bill of sale I got off the internet. Another person who bought this same car I want the same deal. You don't give it to me, I go to another dealership. So people are coming in, which is forcing dealerships to have much lower profits. The profits have collapsed in dealerships a lot. Another reason they may not be around for very long. And they, you know, they have to deal with this. We're moving quickly towards very standard sales practices and prices, and like we saw was experimented with Saturn, you know, 20 years ago. So that's where we're headed. They have to move volume. The one thing that shifts then is a dealership has to sell a lot more cars every day, and they're under a different kind of pressure to roll the sales out every day of the week. So that's one of the changes. And so we'd have to fit into that shifting environment too, the sort of consolidation of dealerships.
It all is shifting, isn't it?
Yeah, it's amazing right now, the amount of change is.
We're in an exciting area.
Yeah.
Ollie, did you have any?
I just wanted to thank you for the interesting presentation. The challenge that I've been facing for the past couple of months was finding some resources to point out to address the SB 1275 requirements for the market sustainability. And I'm so glad to see some of the figures over there for the adopter groups and that chasm. I was wondering if these papers are out there so we can reference to them for the future use. This coming Monday, actually, we have the last workshop for the next fiscal year funding plan. Okay. And some of the materials actually I've put together and we are going to present to the public, but for more confirmation from the scientific perspective, if they are out there, I would be happy to have those papers.
Okay, so what was it specific? I'm sorry, Ali, what was it?
The crossing the chasm and those life cycle.
So you're interested in slides or information?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay, great.
I just have a quick question. Now, nobody's mentioned the 200-mile range EVs that are coming out and how that may change the picture.
Maybe the life cycle first on that, on the 200, big, longer range electrics.
Yeah, well, I mean, I haven't done a 200-mile one yet.
Yeah.
I've got an 80-mile and some PHEV ones, but no big ones. I do think, you know, from a very basic engineering standpoint, you know, you're hauling around a lot more weight, so you're going to have a penalty there. Some of the basic studies that we looked at, just in terms of looking at, you know, the power draw of one of those is much higher. So I think you're probably looking at, you know, when I showed that map, it was a Leaf versus like a Golf, right? You're looking at bigger changes, bigger magnitude differences, because I think you're going to see that those vehicles don't have the same benefits relative to a conventional car. If you compare them to what that buyer would buy otherwise, that's a whole different story. So figuring out what the competing technology is, I think, is always important. But the current 200-milers are luxury cars, so you're sort of looking at a luxury market. That's pretty different. I think when you
but I'm thinking about the new ones that are supposed to be for
right,
the
when you
mainstream
get
consumer.
like the Leaf equivalent for 200 miles, and you know that's something I haven't studied, so I'm not going to make any guesses. But like I said, battery production's not such a big deal, right? It's not going to be the big impact. And part of our work is actually looking at new battery chemistries that think are, because that's been something that's overlooked a lot, is sort of the changing battery chemistry picture, which is happening pretty fast, actually.
I'll make some guesses. She's an engineer, she's better with the numbers, right? So 200 mile, is going to make a big difference in the market, in those particular markets. It's not something in my 25 years of looking at it that we looked very carefully. We didn't quite expect it. We did a lot of work on this from the travel behavior standpoint in the 90s. We looked at the travel patterns of Californians. We looked at what they would be required, did a lot of survey work. At that time, our conclusion, Ken Carani and I concluded, and it's not happy for those who like, the battery electric people were never happy. The people who didn't think battery electric vehicles were they weren't happy either. Our answer was kind of in between. We really expected about the maximum market penetration for all battery electric vehicles in an annual market to be around 15%, if they were equivalent prices to gasoline vehicles. Just looking at how the cars were used, how often, what types of cars people would use. Some of that hasn't changed. So the 200 mile vehicles will still be in kind of smaller vehicles. Unfortunately, the market's going towards larger vehicles now. So you have tension there in the market. Compact cars and mid-sized cars have been shrinking market share every year right now. And crossovers and sport utilities have been growing at double digits, 10 to 15% of the market growth every year. So, and that's worldwide. Those sort of crossover, small compact sport utilities, a lot of them with all-wheel drive. It's a worldwide market issue, and it's in demand. A good example is always to look at Subaru, whose sales in the United States have almost doubled every year for a while. They even came out and said, we can't meet demand for our vehicles. Their vehicles are only staying on lots 17 days. Other vehicles are staying on lots 70 to 80 days. Just imagine what that costs a dealer. So everybody wants to Subaru dealership now, right? And they can't even supply the vehicles. So that is what's in demand. If the 200 mile ranges, that's what I keep talking about this issue of, you got to have the vehicles. If there's anything that can be done in the regulations and incentives, that's where money is being made. It's where the car market is. I can tell you, if you're inside of a car company, all the people who are designers and everything, all their bosses are telling them, I want a crossover. There's no money going towards designing compacts and other vehicles right now. It has shifted. It used to be big sport utility vehicles in the 90s. Now it's in this little area, and it's coming up with kind of sporty. Those vehicles should move well in the market. If we can get 200 mile vehicles into that category, then we'll see a good sales. I don't expect a sudden blossom of sales, but it should, given what Ken and I looked at, satisfy so many more people to have 120, 130 miles of reliable range. It covers so much of people's travel, so many people, and so much of their travel, that the trips that are outside of that, the distribution of trips that we see, it'll solve a huge chunk of them. The 80 mile vehicles just dipped your toe into the reliability for travel. 120, 130 miles almost solves it. There's still going to be residual and people who just are going to throw up their hands at it. We got plug-in hybrids for them, or fuel cells, and that's the way the market's going to be distributed. 200 miles should expand that market. How much it does, price, this is a big battery. It'll be interesting to see where it is. Everybody's saying $30,000, that's after incentives. So probably a $40,000 vehicle, $30,000, that's right in the middle of the market. There's a lot of sales in there. That if you really can make something that's kind of sporty in that category, maybe we'll see some sales.
I'm going to jump in real quick with a little bit of Mike Nicholas research.
Okay.
If that's okay. So some of what he's looked at is the charging infrastructure needed for ranges of vehicles between 60, 80, 100, and 200 mile vehicles. And so the public infrastructure needed, of course, is much smaller because you have home charging that can do the bulk of it. And it does allow for the longer distance travel, so that makes like I-5 seem reasonable, whereas right now I-5 charging seems like not so useful. The other thing that we're seeing right now with our EVMT project is that the kind of benefit in terms of what you get in electric vehicle miles traveled seems to level out somewhere after 120 miles. So while the 200 miles might address the peace of mind picture where you have that reliable 120 or 130 miles range, the RAV4 EVs that we've studied are doing about the same number of annual electric miles as the Teslas that have 270-ish miles. So in terms of like, you know, kind of state benefit in electric miles traveled, you sort of level off after that part. And I think you've seen that. But for other people who haven't heard Mike's research, there is ongoing work in both of those topics.
Great, thanks, Dahlia. So I think we're at our time, and I want to respect everyone else's time so you can get back to your 3 p.m. appointment or meeting or phone call or just finish up your work for the day. So I do just want to thank our speakers again, so we can give them a round of applause. Thank you, Tom and Alyssa, for taking time out of your day as well to come here and share the work that you're doing. So I did take some notes on some of the questions. We are going to wrap up so everyone can leave if you like, but if you want to stick around, I know I'll be here, and I would love to have any other additional conversations or things you want to make sure that I bring back to UC Davis that we should be looking at. I'd really appreciate to hear that. And before we leave too, I just want to call out Lauren Yacobucci. She is our task manager at Caltrans. She was a big help for putting this on. So just thank you, Lauren, and maybe we can give her a little round of applause. It just feels good to get a clap every once in a while. So thank you, everyone. And again, we have the April 6th event. If you want in for more information on that, you can talk to myself or Dahlia or Natalie, and we'll fill you in. So enjoy the rest of your day.